Okay, so what we're looking at today, guys, as we've just done our brainstorm looking at the different rights that patients have when it comes to accessing healthcare, like a doctor or hospital or like a nurse. Basically, we're looking at the rights and responsibilities that we have as patients when it comes to accessing healthcare. Okay, and this is the last spread that will wrap up chapter 10 for us today. So we've already done our brainstorm. I'll put a little screenshot of that on the school box as well. So the first thing that we're looking at is the Australian Charter of Healthcare Rights. Basically, the Australian Charter of Healthcare Rights looks at everything that we just talked about, and it basically looks at this idea that just like the Constitution gives us all our laws, the Australian Charter of Healthcare Rights is a big kind of document that basically outlines our rights that we have when we access the Australian healthcare system. Okay, these rights may differ from country to country, but in Australia, these are the rights that apply. Okay, the rights are there, or the rights exist in order to ensure that any healthcare provided in Australia, whether it's in a medical center or a hospital or a psychologist's office, wherever it is, that healthcare is of high quality, that it is safe, and that it is in the best interest of both the patient and the practitioner involved. Okay, or the professional involved. So these are some of the basic rights that the Australian Charter of Healthcare kind of tells us. Okay, you don't need to know all of them. Maybe just know at least two. Some of them we've already gone through in our little brainstorm before. So all Australians need to be able to have the right to access healthcare. Okay, if you've got a Medicare card and you go into a medical center and they're like, no, we're not accepting you, that's a breach of Australian Charter of Healthcare Rights. You can take that medical center or facility to court because of that, because they're not allowed to do that. Okay, if you've got you also need to be able to have the highest possible standard of physical health and mental health and well-being that's being promoted through that health service. Also, you need to be able to acknowledge that people are of different cultures and that they have different ways of life. Not everyone will be accepting of a certain medication. Not everyone will be open to a new vaccination. So you need to be able to acknowledge this, and you can't just completely overlook the influence of culture or religion or socioeconomic background when it comes to things like accessing healthcare. And it's not just about acknowledging these differences, but also respecting those differences. And by respecting, we mean we say no to things like discrimination. We say no to things like racism. Okay, so we basically respect those differences. Okay, so those are the three kind of main overarching rights that the Australian Charter of Healthcare Rights kind of tells us. Okay, you can learn any two. They're pretty straightforward, I think. These are some rights that you can expect from the Australian healthcare system. Okay, just some keywords, some buzzwords there. Again, you don't need to know all of them. How many have we got here? We've got about 7, maybe know at least 3. Okay. We'll usually give you a choice when it comes to these, so you're not going to be asked about a specific one. Access means that you have a right to healthcare, and you have a right to be able to obtain that healthcare or retrieve that healthcare anytime you need. Safety means that you are able to experience healthcare that's delivered with care, with skill, and with competence. Okay, if you're being delivered a really important vaccine, like a COVID vaccine or something, you would want someone who's obviously experienced in pathology and experienced in delivering immunizations to do that for you. You wouldn't want, like, I don't know, someone who's, you know, it's their first day on the job to do that for you, because they don't have that ability. They don't have that professional competency just yet. Okay, and you might not feel safe with them doing that for you. Respect. So respect is about being shown dignity. It's about being considered by your healthcare provider, regardless of what your culture is, regardless of your beliefs or your values, or even your personal characteristics, you are still given respect. Communication. So communication is this idea that you are well informed about any services or treatment or options, and that you're not spoken to in a very technical or complex way. Your doctor or your healthcare provider explains things to you in a clear and open way that's easy for you to understand without using unnecessary jargon or unnecessary technical language there. Okay, and when they communicate with you, they do so in a timely way. For example, if you've got a really important blood test tomorrow, tomorrow at, let's say, 1 p.m., your medical center shouldn't call you at 12:30 reminding you of that. They should call you the day before confirming that you'll be attending. Okay, and most medical centers do that. Participation. So you have a right to participate or to be included or involved in any decisions. And one of you mentioned this in the previous brainstorm that we did, that the participant must be involved in any decisions that are made. That is their right. Okay. When it comes to what medications a person is taking, a surgery that a person might be thinking about, the doctor can't just go ahead and say, oh, yep, put this person down for lap band surgery. They're obese. They need to get rid of their fat. Okay. Lap band surgery is a type of surgery that's done for people who are morbidly obese, who can't lose extra weight around their waist through exercise and dietary changes. Now, if you're morbidly obese, your doctor can't just make the decision that, oh, yeah, it's clear to me that they need that, put them down for that. They have to ask you first. They have to involve you in that decision, because it's your body at the end of the day, and it's your health at the end of the day. So they do need to involve you there. Privacy, and we'll talk a little bit more about privacy and to what extent privacy needs to be met and to what extent confidentiality needs to be met. Your personal privacy needs to be met when it comes to health information. What this technically means is, let's say if my mum and I go to the same doctor, if it's the same doctor who knows us both really well, and my mum comes in and is like, oh, did Frowin come this week? Can you please tell me what's going on with her health? The doctor literally cannot say anything about the appointments that I've been having with him or her to my mum. Even though it's my mum, the doctor is actually they've pledged this kind of confidentiality agreement that they can't disclose that information. Okay, so that's the basic idea. And comment means that you have the right to comment, okay, on the care and to have your concerns addressed. Now, this is a funny one, because depending on the culture that you come from, your ability to comment is actually affected. Okay, so obviously in Australia, we live in a pretty democratic nation where we have all these rights, even with reference to healthcare. But in countries like, for example, in Sri Lanka. So in Sri Lanka, doctors have this kind of they're put on a big throne, and they're kind of seen as very high status people. So if you were to kind of comment on what the doctor's giving you or ask them too many questions, they might actually get frustrated. They might be like, oh, do you know who I am? I know more than you. So they might often retaliate if you try to make too many comments. Obviously, we have the right to comment or complain, but at the same time, commenting or complaining on something your doctor or nurse or healthcare provider has provided you should not equal to abuse, okay? You should never be abusing healthcare providers, because they're there to do good by you. So we need to obviously make sure that commenting or complaining is done in a constructive way rather than a destructive way. Okay, so those are some rights. You can choose any three that are easiest for you to remember and that make the most sense to you. Okay, so moving on. These are some more rights. And look, a lot of this is very repetitive, but again, there's so many different rights that we can talk about. A lot of these we have already covered in our little brainstorm before, but again, just learn any three from this one as well. You'll notice some of them are repeated from the table in the previous slide. So these are all the different types of rights that a person can have. Okay, so most of them we have covered. Which ones haven't we covered? This one, so visiting arrangements. So let's say you're put in a hospital for some surgery. You need to be able to be given information. So if your friend is in the hospital because they've got injured or something, they need the doctors there or the hospital staff there have the right, or they have the responsibility, to give you information about, okay, these are the hours that you can visit your friend. These are the time slots that you can visit your friend while they're in the hospital. So they must look into that. It's the healthcare providers to meet those rights or fulfill those rights for the patient as well as the patient's family and friends. Okay. It's also another patient right to seek out other medical opinions. Let's say you go to a doctor. So this actually happened with me. The example I gave before about that doctor who basically told me to go home and gargle with salt water because my throat was hurting. So I wasn't obviously happy with his opinion. So the next day I went to the same medical center, hoping that I wouldn't bump into this doctor again, and then booked in with another doctor who literally gave me another opinion and said, you know what, I don't like the look of this. And it was during that whole COVID time. So obviously he got me to take a COVID test just in case. And he prescribed me some, some antibiotic, because actually I was on the way to getting sick And just the day before, the doctor who I'd gone to before said I was fine and I had no issues. So this is why we have the right as patients to get a second opinion. And you should always get a second opinion if you doubt the doctor who saw you, or you don't have faith in what the first doctor told you. Okay, you should always get a second opinion. Always listen to your body more than the opinion of a person. If you feel that you're sick, there's probably something happening in there. So you should always get that second opinion. And you have all the right to do that. Even if it's in the same medical center as the first doctor you went to, it doesn't matter. Just go get a second opinion. It can save your condition from getting worse. All right, so what are some responsibilities, guys? We've talked about rights. We've talked about everything we're entitled to as patients. Now, what are our responsibilities? In other words, patients' responsibilities equal to or similar to the rights that the healthcare provider has. Let me just type that. Okay, so when we talk about a healthcare provider, like a medical center or a doctor's clinic or whatever, what kind of rights do they have? Or what responsibilities do you have as a patient to basically, to meet or to fulfill to that healthcare provider? The first one is that it's your right to provide information about your past and present illnesses, any hospitalizations you've gone through, any medications, and any other matters relating to health history. You guys probably don't have experience doing this, but whenever you join a new medical center, they give you like a paper and a clipboard. Maybe they do it online now as well. And you've got to fill in all your details there. Your parents most likely have done that for you. So you've got to fill in your name, your past conditions. Do you suffer from any heart conditions? Do you suffer from, any blood-related disorders? Like there's all these different medical-related questions. It's your responsibility as a patient to make sure you answer these truthfully. Okay, because look, if you're going to lie on a test like that, if you're going to lie on a patient information form like that, and later on you get prescribed some medication and your doctor prescribes it to you without the knowledge that you are allergic to some kind of drug, like let's say you're allergic to penicillin, and then they've prescribed you an antibiotic which has penicillin in it, you might very well likely get really affected because you've taken that and you haven't told the doctor about your allergy beforehand. So it's really important to make sure you answer these truthfully, because otherwise the only person that's going to get affected is you by withholding information. Okay, it's also your responsibility as a patient to ask questions. This is one of the reasons why doctors in Australia are really, really open to you asking as many questions as you need. Sometimes I'll be waiting in a medical clinic, the person's gone in before me. It's like, oh my God, they're taking 2 hours. Why are they taking so long? Because a lot of people need to ask these questions and they have all the right to ask the questions. And obviously, as a patient, we need to understand that doctors also have the right, also have the responsibility to explain these questions and to explain any risks involved. Okay. Patient responsibilities are also that they follow the instructions and medical orders of their doctors. So if their doctor says, okay, Varun, you're not feeling well, you're sick, you can't go to school for the next 2 days. And that's what actually happened. So I didn't go to school for the next 2 days. I was at home, I was resting. If I defied or if I went against those instructions and went to school, I might have gotten much more ill. Okay, I might not have been able to recover as quickly. They know the best outcome, so you need to follow their instructions. Another patient responsibility that you have towards the healthcare provider is that you need to report any safety concerns immediately to the doctor, nurse, or healthcare support staff. So this is both with reference to safety, as in like hazards in the wait, like if you're in the waiting room of a medical center and there's like water in the middle, like someone spilled a puddle of water and it's a hazard, you need to report that directly to the receptionist or to someone that's in that medical center to clean it up, because that's a safety concern. Similarly, if you're in a medical center and let's say someone who is really, really sick comes into the medical center and sits in the waiting room, particularly in today's time of COVID-19, that patient, you need to be able to tell the receptionist that this patient is in the waiting room, but isn't it protocol that they need to wait in their car? Okay, a lot of receptionists already pick up on this, but if they don't, you need to remind them. Okay, it does seem like it's dropping in, but again, that's all to do with protecting the safety of everyone else in there. Treating medical staff with respect. So this is with reference to no abuse. Okay, and there's a lot of, you might have seen signs around medical centers that saying that, you know, abusing healthcare staff is never okay and stuff like that. So you've got to treat them with respect. Again, a lot of our medical staff do have to, you know, work every day, especially now with all these PPE equipment, and it's hard. So treating them with respect is the least that you can do. Asking questions about costs before treatment, this is your responsibility. If you don't ask about the costs, sometimes doctors forget. They're telling you a million things. They might not remember to tell you about the costs. It is still your responsibility to ask or to prompt that information to come out. Okay, and obviously the doctor's responsibility is also to ensure that any out-of-pocket or additional costs are paid on time. If you forget to pay and the doctor forgets to ask, and 12 months down the track, they're like, oh, you know, you've got to pay me this much, and you're not in a good financial situation, you will eventually have to pay it back, but you can ask the doctor for an extension. You can be like, you never reminded me about this at the time. So, you know, I did what I had to do. But you didn't remind me at the time. So again, that's really important to make sure that you remember that these are the patient responsibilities. And if you do remember about the costs well before time, it's your responsibility to pay those costs on time and not delay. Okay, so those are some responsibilities. Again, just learn any three, whichever ones make the most sense to you. Privacy and confidentiality. So privacy and confidentiality is about this idea that generally when we go into a medical center or a healthcare provider, we need to be able to feel that our medical records will be stored and shared safely, that they're not going to somehow be leaked. They're not going to somehow be disclosed to people who just ask about them, okay? Without the consent of the patient, no medical records or medical history can be shared. It can only be shared if you give consent. One example of how this might happen is if I normally go to, let's say, Tani Medical Center, and I've moved, let's say, to another medical center in, I don't know, Alterna. Let's say I want my medical records or my history to go from the Tani Medical Center, where I was most of the time. I want that record or that history to be sent to the Alterna Medical Center. I need to then give consent to my doctor in Tani and tell them, you know what? I give you consent, or it's totally fine with me if you send my medical records to my new doctor in Alterna. And if that happens, then that is one way that you have given consent. Okay. If that doesn't happen, you can't actually just transfer or just be sending a patient's medical records back and forth. Medical confidentiality is basically about ensuring that medical histories are kept private. Okay. And that whatever you discuss in that room with the GP is protected under this clause known as doctor-patient confidentiality, okay? And when you go to a new doctor, you may choose to share that information or to not share that information, okay? Again, it's your responsibility to, if you choose not to share the information, to tell them anything important, like tell them that, okay, I've got allergies to this, or I have type 2 diabetes or something like that, okay? So it's important for you to explain any existing health issues. Yeah, now there are exceptions to privacy and confidentiality, okay? For example, if the patient is a child, then obviously the child doesn't manage their own medical records just yet. The parents do have access to the child's medical information. Okay, also sometimes when you're dealing with patients who have intellectual disabilities or who have cognitive impairments who can't manage that information themselves, they might have a carer or a legal guardian who may be authorized or given the approval to access the information for any adults that are under their care. Okay, we're talking about people with like intellectual disabilities or syndromes like Down syndrome or autism that might not be able to manage those by themselves. So that's privacy and confidentiality. We have some further exemptions to privacy laws, okay? And you might have seen this seen in certain TV shows, you know, a person's medical history is just disclosed. There are certain exceptions or exemptions to privacy laws because we can't always ensure that medical records are kept private. Okay, there are two specific situations or examples where we can have an exemption or we can make an excuse to that privacy condition. The first one is if a patient or someone else's health and well-being are at risk or are at serious threat or seriously threatened. For example, if a patient is unconscious and a paramedic or a doctor or a nurse needs to know the patient's allergies, they can then go and access that patient's health record without asking for their consent, because obviously the person lying on the floor unconscious, they can't just ask for consent like that. Okay, and obviously this is it's a matter of life or death. So in order to save the person's life, we can kind of bend the law a little bit when it comes to privacy of medical records. Also, when the information will reduce or prevent a serious threat to public health or safety, for example, warning the public if there's this outbreak of a serious contagious illness. Okay, so in other words, if we think that this patient might have COVID-19 and they're at an event where, there's a lot of people around them, we can actually go in and check whether they've had a COVID test done recently and what result they had. So that is another way we can kind of bend the privacy law a little bit. Okay, those are the only two examples in which an exemption to a privacy law can occur. You don't need to learn both, just learn one. Learn the one that makes the most sense to you and the one that's easiest for you to explain. Okay, so just to finish off for today, we're just going to watch these two videos that I've linked on this last slide here. But content-wise, that's about it for today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording here.